Hello everybody, my name is John Mark Johnson Jr. I am the host of Reformed GGA, and today we're going to be taking another look at my CZ P-10C. And the reason why I'm doing another video on this beastie is because a friend of mine is interested in at least perhaps getting one. The reason why my friend is interested in it is because he is left-handed, and different people in his family, his kids and such, some of them are left-handed like he is, and some of them are right-handed like his wife is. And so having a gun that is truly ambidextrous, you can hand it to a left-handed person and you can hand it to a right-handed person, and both of them will be able to make use of it in the same configuration. A truly ambidextrous handgun is something that is of interest to him. Right now, just so you guys know, all of the guns that will appear in this video have already been checked and cleared off camera for those of you who are concerned about the safety of events that are happening in videos that you are watching. Go ahead and pull it out of its holster here. Now, even though the gun is ambidextrous, unfortunately holsters are not. This is a right-handed holster for someone who carries inside the waistband, which is what I would typically do with this gun when I was actively using it. And this is a great little holster made by Galco. This one costs about $50. The range of price is for good holsters like these nice solid Kydex holsters that really protect the trigger area well, have a good firm lockup, are reaching to you quite well. Holsters like this usually cost somewhere between $40 and $70. If you pay more than that, you're probably overpaying. If you pay less than that, you probably wound up with basically junk. But yeah, unfortunately holsters are kind of specific to the particular hand that you're using. So for inside the waistband, this would work for a right-hander. Technically you can make it work as an outside the waistband holder for a left-handed person, but these kinds of holsters are not suggested for would not be suggested for outside the waistband use because it doesn't have any retention device. There's no button strap or little push button on the side or anything like that that forces the gun to be in there. It makes it so that it's basically impossible to yank out. When you carry a gun outside the waistband, you usually want to have some kind of retention device like I just described, either some kind of thumb release strap or push button system that holds the gun in place, mostly just to prevent people from trying to steal it off of you. And if you don't think that is an issue, talk to a police officer who open carries and see what his thoughts on that issue are. Yeah, something that doesn't have any kind of retention device or push button release or anything like that, not a good idea for outside the waistband. But if you were to carry it, say, in the field, out hiking or something where you don't plan on being around other people, then it would probably work as an outside waistband holster in that situation. But in others, it really should be an inside the waistband holster for a right-handed person. But that's not what we're here for. We're here to talk about the CZ P-10 itself. In terms of the features that make it ambidextrous, truly ambidextrous, is the fact that the major controls, triggers always pretty much ambidextrous, but the other major controls are in fact present in both sides and work basically the same on both sides. So for example, you do have a magazine release here on the left, and that same magazine release can be found on the right-hand side if you're to use it as a right-handed user, and works basically the same way there. Also, the slide stop is repeated on both sides. It works the exact same way. I do find the slide stop to be very, very, very low profile, and so I actually find it somewhat difficult to use with just one finger. So when I use it, I'm actually usually pushing up on both of them. If I want to lock open the slide, let's go ahead and take the empty mag out. So yeah, I usually push up on both and then pull down on both to close it. But it does occur on both sides, works equally well that way. Like a good many other striker-fired guns that are used for personal defense, whether it be out in the woods or out in the hood, whatever the case happens to be, this one does not have a safety. Striker-fired guns were made not to have a safety. The holster is basically what acts as your safety on striker-fired guns. And so you really want to make sure that you have a quality holster that has good solid lockup so that it's not going to fall out on its own or anything like that. So it doesn't come out on its own. It protects the trigger area quite well. There's no way I could get a finger inside there. And then, of course, have a very strong clip or some kind of attachment device that stays very, very, very well attached to you. In this case, it latches. This particular clip is made to latch onto a belt. And so as long as you're wearing a good sturdy belt, this is a good sturdy clasp, keeps it on you, and that is the safety for these guns. As long as you have a good holster and you're careful about your reholstering technique, they're perfectly fine. When people have trouble with striker-fired guns, it's usually because they have poor holstering technique and/or bad holsters, especially the cloth ones or the leather ones or the hybrid ones that are a little bit floppy, and you can wind up getting weird things caught in them, and that is no good for a holster. So there is no safety on it, but like I said, that is typical for the type. Alright, so we've covered all the basic ambidextrous features. Now let's talk a little bit about some of the practical concerns in carrying it. Those of you who followed my channel already know that I'm basically in the process of replacing this gun as one of my carry guns. This used to be my wintertime carry, and in the summer I would use a Springfield Hellcat just because it was a lot smaller and much easier to conceal, a lot less heavy, etc., etc. In the wintertime, though, I would usually carry this thing, and it worked pretty well, but as you can see, it is fairly large. And the magazines that I use on it have this little base to extension on them that increase the capacity to 17 rounds. So 17 in the magazine, plus 1 in the chamber if you decide to top off. And that was okay. And frankly, for the longest time, I really didn't consider it to be too terribly big of an issue. Even in the summertime, I would carry this. But as time has gone on, I have kind of rethink that just in light of other options that are on the market that I normally wouldn't have considered in the past because I thought this was perfectly fine, and it is still perfectly fine. But there are admittedly better options out there in terms of concealed carry, and so that's what I've gone to. So let's go ahead and talk about that real quick. So this is the gun that is basically going to replace my CZ P-10C, and this is a Sig Sauer P365XL, and it holds 12 rounds in the magazine, and unfortunately all of its controls are designed for a right-handed person. So it is not a truly ambidextrous gun at all. Because yeah, your slide stop and then also your takedown lever are only on the left side. And the slide stop does not switch to the other side. I think that the magazine release may be swappable to the other side. It certainly looks like it, but it does not occur on the other side. So if you wanted to get something like this for a left-handed person, you would have to manually go in and change the magazine release, which would be a little bit of a pain, but not too bad. So that part would be switched over, but the slide stop, that's always going to be on the other side, and so that's an issue. But for me as a right-handed person, it's not really a big issue at all because it works for me just great. And as you can see, it also has a red dot on it that is mounted into the slide, and so it's fairly low profile for what a red dot can be by comparison. But it is a fairly small handgun by comparison. Just to compare it to the CZ P-10C here, we'll go ahead and get the magazines flush, and you'll notice that if I'm going by the magazine here, the SIG is noticeably smaller than the P-10, even with the red dot on it. If we're lining up the magazine height, the P-10 is definitely bigger than that. And so yeah, this one turns out that it's just a lot easier to carry, and unlike a lot of other small 9mm handguns. This one is actually reasonably easy to shoot. That's one of my primary concerns with a lot of these small handguns, and my concern with the Springfield Hellcat when I had it. It's already been sold and it's gone because I really didn't like that gun. But the nice thing about this one is that it is actually accurate out to, reasonable distances for a handgun. I can hit an 8-inch plate at 25 yards with it pretty easily all day. It's not really a very difficult task with this gun. Other small guns, getting to 25 yards consistently can be a bit more of an issue. The Hellcat, for example, technically I could do it, but had an atrocious trigger, so it took some doing to get there. This one is much easier, and I can get to basically the same ranges that I could with the P-10C. That's one of the reasons why I like carrying something this big, or at least used to like carrying something that big, because I knew that I could hit at greater distances with it. Typically a bigger gun is more comfortable. You can get, of course, a better grip on it, hold it more securely. You're going to be more accurate at distance. This, however, was basically designed with those kinds of requirements in mind, so it has a really good trigger, and the grip surfaces on it are such that you can get a pretty good handle on the gun and get out to those distances relatively easily, and that's why this gun is replacing the other. But as I said, for the longest time I used the P-10 as my everyday carry gun. And in terms of design and reliability, it was designed actually to be a Glock competitor. And Glock actually, frankly, got its little hiney kicked by this thing. Now, Glock, of course, has already been out on the market for decades and decades, and they're still great guns, and so there's a huge market share that they already have, and there's tons of aftermarket support for them. Glock's not going away anytime soon, but in terms of the basic things that Glock can do, the P-10 can also do. Glocks, for example, are known to be very reliable, usually only suffering a malfunction about once in every 2,000 rounds, provided that you're using decent ammunition and keeping the gun decently well maintained. The CZ P-10C in its comparable testing usually does just as well as the Glocks. In some of the testing, it actually did a lot better than the Glocks. I think it was the Fort Scott torture test on this thing, where they were actually able to go to 6,000 rounds before getting their first malfunction, which is pretty stinking impressive. So in terms of reliability, it's just as reliable as the Glocks. In terms of the basic features, pretty much everything is the same. Even the takedown is basically the same. I'll go ahead and show that here. So I just took out the magazine. Go ahead and open up the action, check and make sure that we're clear. Go ahead and close it up, fire, and then these little takedown tabs on either side of the handgun are what you're going to pull down while pulling back on the slide just a little bit. So pull those down, pull back on the slide, and then release it forward. The lower comes off, and it's basically just plastic with a hole through it and a few extra little metal bits. And then all the main stuff is, of course, in the slide itself. Typical recoil spring, and this recoil spring does have a polymer guide rod in it. A lot of people, when these first came out, a lot of people absolutely hated them and didn't think that they would be reliable at all. And it actually turns out that they are just fine as long as you're working with fairly normal ammunition loads and, fairly normal regular maintenance and that kind of thing. Not a significant detractor to reliability at all. And then you have the barrel, and the barrel you just kind of push forward and down to angle it out. And then you pull it back out, and that is the barrel on these little things. And like most CZs, this has a reputation for being fairly accurate. The standard measure for most CZ handguns is that you're able to get within a 4-inch target. I think technically they use a 10 centimeter target, but basically a 4-inch target for us in the US, within 25 meters. That's the basic measure that all of them have to be capable of as a bare minimum. A lot of them are more accurate than that, especially when you get into more specialized ammo. When they do their tests at the factory, it is usually with fairly generic S&B ammunition. If you put a match load in it, of course, it is going to be different. And then for those of you that didn't notice, because I didn't do it on screen, replacing the barrel is fairly straightforward. Slide it in there, and then slide it back and make sure that it goes into its actual locking recess. And then with the spring, the small end goes towards the front. Push it in there a little bit, and actually sets a little bit forward there of the actual locking block. And so make sure that it is nice and forward on there. And then once you get that, you can just take your frame, slide it on there, pull it back, and it is back together. So very simple disassembly. You know, 4 basic parts. There's the frame, there's the slide, there is the recoil rod and spring, that's one assembly, and the barrel, and that's it. Fairly easy to disassemble, fairly easy to get into to clean, and all those kinds of things, like I said. Very reliable. I've had this gun for a number of years now, and I still haven't gotten it to malfunction. That being said, it needs to be pointed out that I usually use decent ammunition in it. Brass case, copper jacket with a lead core, and I usually go for the little bit hotter loads if I can. I've fired a lot of 124 grain NATO through this thing, which is more or less 124 grain plus P. The defensive loads that I use in it are usually 124 grain variants as well. So like the 124 grain plus P from the on the American Gunner line, which is one of the Hornady lines. So I use that. I've also used the Sig Sauer 124 grain V-Crown, which does not say that it's a plus P, but it is a little bit hotter load than other 124 grain setups are. And then there's also the Federal Punch that I've used, and I believe that one's also 124 grain. Don't think it's quite as higher pressure though, but still a little bit on the higher side. And with that ammunition, it usually just fine. Like I said, I also use the Winchester NATO ammo for plinking, and pretty much all of the 115 grain plinking ammo as well works just fine too. I would just recommend, and I would recommend this for pretty much any autoloader, is staying away from the really light loads, either low powder or low grain weight for the bullet. For example, Fort Scott makes some 80 grain 9mm ammunition that, while it has some very good penetrative characteristics upon firing, it doesn't always work the action on handguns all that well. So just be aware of that. And in, of course, the course of using this thing, you can see that I modified it a little bit. It has a extended rail on the dovetail, so it still has the traditional U-notch in the back of it. And I went ahead and finally, I actually didn't do this when I first got it, when I first got this new rail for the back, but recently I got around to putting a little bit higher front sight on the front end. Let's see if I can actually get it so that we can see the sight picture when everything's lined up. Yeah, so you see the white dot outlined by the black, and it's a pretty usable sighting system. It's just fine. However, for the longest time, I took advantage of this rail that I put on the back by doing a reflex light with a Picatinny adapter with a 1913 rail adapter on it. And that, of course, made the sight setup quite a bit, and so is that less comfortable to concealed carry, but it worked very well and it was very accurate. So that is an option for people. They also, if you wanted to buy brand new, they also make these with cutouts in the slide, just like I showed on the SIG. The SIG actually has a cutout in the slide, so you can put a red dot directly on the slide. And they do make that option for the P-10Cs. Now you can actually get them with a proper cutout for a red dot. But if you happen to get one of the older models, putting an adapter rail on here or one of the adapter plates that they make out there also happens to work. Now in this particular case, the way that I put it on is such that I actually cannot get it off. I tried with every ounce of strength I had and every little clever trick that I've ever learned along the way for loosening things, and that thing is not budging. I tried everything. Yeah. yeah, no way that it would punch out, no way that I could heat it up and force it out that way or anything. That thing is just on there for good now, unless you literally want to like mill it out or something like that, but that would be rather arduous, especially for a gun like this. And another thing that is nice about guns like this is that CZ, in making it to be a Glock competitor, actually made it relatively inexpensive. Back in the day, a few years ago, before 2020 and everything that went on there, you could sometimes get these on sale for as little as $400. If it was not on sale, you know, somewhere between $5 and $5.50 was not terribly uncommon. Today, most of the time that I see these, it's usually $4.50 to $5.50, sometimes a little bit less, sometimes a little bit more, just kind of depending on the venue. But they're not overly expensive handguns, which is very nice, especially compared to Glock. Glock is, you know, a lot of times at least $100, if not $200 more expensive. And with Glock, part of what you're paying for there is the brand name, you're paying for the aftermarket support, although it is worth pointing out that CZs have a lot of aftermarket support too now. So with Glock, you're paying for the name, you're paying for the aftermarket support, and you're also, in the case of the Glocks, paying for their polygonal rifling system that they have that increases the barrel life, and it really does increase the barrel life. It is a good system in that regard, but you do pay for it. CZ, they wanted to keep things relatively cheap and simple for their customers, and so they don't do the polygonal rifling. Instead, they use conventional lands and grooves. And so that keeps the cost down a little bit. They don't last quite as long, but most civilians don't go through enough rounds for it to really make a difference. I mean, you're still talking, you know, 10, 20, maybe even more than that, 1,000 rounds before you start to see any significant wear on the barrel. Pistol rounds in general, going at pistol velocities, usually don't put a lot of wear and tear on the barrel. It's usually not a big deal. You're probably going to need to replace the recoil spring and rod well before you ever get around to replacing the barrel on these things. So yes, it is technically lower quality than a Glock in that particular regard, but like I said, for most people, they're not going to be firing 10 or 20,000 rounds in the lifetime of the gun. Like I said, you'll need to replace other things well before you get to that point. Another thing to consider with this gun is that even though it is truly and completely ambidextrous, it is a gun that to some people is quite uncomfortable, and that has to do with the stippling on the back strap and the stippling that is on the front of the grip there. I personally don't mind it. I am used to it. I've shot with this gun for years now, and to me it feels very normal. However, other people find it a little bit disconcerting when their hand looks like that after gripping the gun. That grip is there to make sure that it does not leave your hand, but like I said, some people really don't like how aggressive it is. And so as a recreational shooter, it's usually not as good. You know, there are guns that I like to have in my collection, not necessarily for any great, you know, tactical purpose or hunting reason or anything like that. They're just there because they're fun to plink with. And unfortunately, I've had very, very few people consider this gun to be fun to plink with. There have been a few, but by and large, most people don't like to plink with it because they're not used to that really aggressive texture. However, like I said, I've gotten used to it, and I think that most other people could get used to it too. It's just a matter of spending time with it. But that is a downside to it. And I already mentioned it is definitely larger than some of the other options that were out there. Of course, until I got into those other options, I thought it was perfectly fine. And to kind of put that in context, you look at this and you say, well, that thing was huge compared to the SIG. What would you be comparing this to that you would think that this would be a fine size to conceal carry? Let me show you. This is what I carried before the P-10C. This is the CZ P09, of course, with the suppressor height sights, and I'm using a magazine in it with a little extended base plate on it. With that extended base plate holds 21 rounds in the magazine, of course, plus one in the chamber if you want to top off. So 22 rounds of ammunition. The barrel on it is considerably longer. It's over 5 inches. It's like 5 1/6 or something like that. 5.15 or something in that ballpark. So has an extended barrel, very, very, very large grip, just a beast of a handgun. And I actually, believe it or not, used to conceal carry this thing. But yeah, by comparison, I'll go ahead and put the magazine in the other one just so that it's a fair comparison. Now, and lining up the base plates, you can see the difference there. The P-09 is definitely a little bit taller, and of course these things never want to behave all that well, but yeah, the P-09 is definitely taller, definitely longer. And so when I switched out to the P-10, that definitely was an upgrade, and being able to put a red dot on it, however clumsily, was definitely an upgrade. But like I said, this is something that I don't really have much interest anymore in, just because there are other guns that are on the market that can do the job better in terms of concealability. The Sig Sauer P365XL, like I said, it shoots a lot like the bigger guns in terms of functional accuracy, especially with the red dot on there. I find it much easier to get hits with, and it's got a good trigger pull, all those kinds of things. However, these high performance small guns like this can be a little bit expensive. Most of the time you're going to pay at least $500 for them, sometimes $650 for them, depending on the particular make and model. Then getting a red dot separate is going to usually cost, at least $250 more. There's some red dots out there that are cheaper. You might be able to get for close to $130, $150 on a good sale. Whether or not you'd want to bet your life on those optics is a little bit more debatable. But in terms of the concealed carry world, guns like this are taking over just because they're much more convenient to carry because they're so much smaller. And they've got pretty good ergonomics and pretty good triggers, which means you can still get the same kind of accuracy out of them. And even though the capacity is less, it's not so much less as to be completely detrimental. This is still a 12-round magazine in here. That's not exactly nothing. It's still twice what you get out of, like, say, the old 6-shot revolvers and those kinds of things. So it's still good that way, and of course you can get extended magazines for them and all that good jazz. But that's kind of the way that concealed carry is going, is smaller guns, with attributes that make them capable of operating at greater distances if they need to. And because of that, guns like this, the CZ P-10C, the Glock 19, other guns that would be in the same kind of basic form factor, where what they basically did was take something like the P-09, which would be considered, well, it's not even a full size, it's actually beyond full size. This would be more like a duty gun, with very large barrels, very large handles, and all those kinds of things. The old method of doing concealed carry was basically to just chop it down, chop off the front end, give it a 4-inch barrel, chop off the handle, put it in a 15-round configuration instead of a 17-plus round configuration, and that was your new concealed carry gun. This was a compact, and that's actually what the C in P-10C stands for, is compact. Like I said, it's not really compact anymore by modern standards, but compared to where it came from, those full-size guns like the P-09 that I showed you, it actually is fairly compact. And like I said, for the longest time, I never bothered carrying anything else, mostly just because I hadn't shot anything else that I thought would really be worth the while. The Hellcat to me proved that you can get very reliable small guns that were technically capable of the kind of accuracy that I was looking for. The problem with that particular model, the Springfield Hellcat, is that its stock trigger is absolutely atrocious. And for my personal guns, when I conceal carry them or carry them defensively, I don't like to mess with the stock trigger too much. Part of that is for legal reasons, and then part of it is for reliability reasons. If you want the kind of reliability that these kinds of guns are famous for, you need to keep things usually basically more or less in their stock configuration. Adding some things, externally is usually not going to mess with too much, but changing things like the trigger pull and stuff like that can result in some major problems as far as reliability goes, so I don't like messing with those. But yeah, the Springfield Hellcat, like I said, it was terrible. It proved that you could get, to me, I'm saying, not to anyone else, but getting it proved to me that the small handgun, that there are small handguns that are actually viable for concealed carry. That one wasn't just a particularly good one because of the trigger. But in terms of function, guns like this still definitely work as nice full size grip. I really like that it has a proper shelf on the trigger guard, so I can wrap my index finger around the front. Not everybody shoots like I do, but I do like to do that. So it's very big that way, and of course the trigger guard itself is huge, works well with gloved hands and those kinds of things. So in the wintertime, great carry that way. Just as accurate as you could ever ask for, because I mean, even though it is technically a compact, it shoots like a full-size gun, because that's basically what it is. It's just had a little bit of chopped off the front and a little bit chopped off the bottom, but it's basically a full-size gun in terms of how it handles. And so I mean, it's still a pleasure to shoot, it's still reliable, all those kinds of things. The only real downside of the gun is just that it's a little bigger than some of the more modern competition. That's the only thing I can really hold against it. But it's been perfectly reliable. I have never had this gun malfunction. And the P-09, by comparison, I did have one malfunction with this gun, and it was with some of the 80 grain Fort Scott ammunition. It just doesn't have a whole lot of kick to it, so it didn't really did not properly cycle the action one time. And so one malfunction in the P-09, no malfunctions in the P-10C at all. That's with regular maintenance and feeding it fairly decent ammunition. You know, brass case, copper jacket lead core, and stuff that's a little bit on the higher side. It doesn't have to be super hot, but on the hotter side usually would be a little bit better just to ensure reliability. But yeah, that is basically the gun in a nutshell. Like I said, it's truly ambidextrous. All the controls on one side are on the other side. It does not have a safety because striker-fired guns were not meant to have safeties. Instead, it is your holster that functions as the safety on these guns. Yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about that. For anyone who's wondering what my opinion on guns like this is, I very much so still like it. It's just it's kind of a dinosaur in the modern concealed carry world. It's not a bad gun at all. It's just not going to compete with something like the SIG. The SIG P365XL is a really good contender. Smaller, lighter, just as accurate in my opinion. Good trigger pull, and oh, by the way, this one does have a good trigger pull as well. Just making sure that we're empty here. But there's a little bit of take-up like on most guns. You're just going against the return trigger spring, which I think is only like half a pound or 3/4 of a pound. Then you get into the wall. There's a little bit of stacking. It breaks at about 4 3/4 pounds. And I did not take out the magazine. And then for resets, that's the reset. And then you're right back into it. So fairly light trigger, and as I said, the reset on it is very short. Yeah, can't talk today. So good performance that way. Like I said, it's just as accurate as any full-size gun, because it basically is a full-size gun. It does everything you could need it to do possibly. The only thing is it's just not as small and light as its modern competition. That's really the only bad thing about guns like this. Whether it be the P-10C specifically or the Glock 19, which this one was designed to be a competitor for, or anything like that that's out there. Some of the Canics also fall in the same category. You know, there's lots of guns like this that are still on the market, but like I said, they're just kind of dinosaurs these days. For concealed carry, this is antiquated. It's just too big to compete with a lot of the modern stuff. But if you're looking for a self-defense gun on a budget, getting a used P-10C or a used Glock 19 or something like that is not a bad choice. They still work perfectly fine. They're just not as convenient as newer options. That's all. All right. Thank you all very much for your time and attention. For those of you who are in Christ, go with God and be blessed. For those of you who are not, I pray that you would come to know Him and to submit to Him, the only genuine Savior of mankind. Amen.